The summer of 1985 had settled thick and heavy over northern Louisiana. The air buzzed with heat and cicadas, and in the small town of Natchitoches, life moved slow. Church bells on Sundays, fishing on Cane River Lake, neighbors who waved whether they knew you or not. But on the night of July 12th, that quiet rhythm shattered. At 10:47 p.m., a local deputy responding to a call about an abandoned car found a cream-colored Oldsmobile Cutlass parked along a narrow service road outside town. The driver's door hung open. The headlights were still on, casting pale light across the gravel. Inside the car sat a woman's purse, a camera, and a half-drunk cup of sweet tea. The driver, Linda Parker, was gone. Linda was 26, a soft-spoken elementary school teacher known for her kindness, her Sunday choir voice, and her habit of taking long evening drives when she couldn't sleep. She'd grown up in Natchitoches, left briefly for college in Shreveport, then returned to teach second grade. Friends called her steady, responsible. The kind of woman who never missed a phone call or failed to show up to work on time. That night, she'd left her parents' home around 8:30, telling her mother she was just going to clear her head. She never came back. By dawn, the sheriff's department had organized search teams. Volunteers combed through nearby fields and ditches, while boats dragged slow circles through the muddy water along the bayou. The community came alive with fear and hope. Neighbors gathered at the church to pray. Others taped her photograph to storefront windows. But as the sun rose over the humid horizon, not a trace of Linda appeared. Investigators at the scene noted one strange detail: faint tire tracks in the mud behind her Oldsmobile, suggesting another vehicle had pulled in behind hers that night. But the heavy rain that came hours later washed most of it away. Deputy Earl Maddox, one of the first on the scene, later said, "It looked like she just vanished into the dark. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. Like she'd stepped right out of her own life." Within days, the Louisiana State Police joined the case. They interviewed co-workers, friends, and an on-again, off-again boyfriend named Robert Bobby Hill, a 29-year-old mechanic who'd known Linda since high school. He claimed he hadn't seen her in over a week. When detectives questioned him, he was polite but uneasy, fidgeting with his lighter as he answered. There was no evidence to hold him, but his name went into the file, underlined twice. Rumors began to swirl through town. Some said she'd been abducted by a stranger passing through on I-49. Others whispered about an affair, a secret she might have been keeping. Her students left flowers on her classroom desk, the chalkboard still bearing the last words she'd written. "See you Monday." Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. Then 3 miles south of where her car was found, a hunter discovered a single white shoe tangled in reeds along a creek bed. It was Linda's. Searchers combed the area again, but nothing else surfaced. Without a body, the sheriff couldn't even declare her dead. The investigation went on for months. Hundreds of interviews, polygraph tests, roadblocks, but every lead fell flat. By early 1986, the file was marked inactive. Linda Parker had simply disappeared. Her parents never left their home on Cane River Road. Every Christmas, her mother kept the porch light burning through the night, a quiet signal. Year after year, for a daughter who never returned. For nearly 4 decades, the Parker case would haunt Natchitoches, whispered about in diners, revisited by generations of detectives, and kept alive only by a small box of evidence that sat gathering dust on a shelf deep inside the sheriff's office. Until, in the spring of 2023, that old box was opened again, and what they found inside would expose a truth no one in that small Louisiana town ever saw coming. The first few weeks after Linda Parker vanished were chaos wrapped in humidity. Deputies worked around the clock, retracing every mile of the roads she might have taken that night. They brought in bloodhounds, divers, even borrowed a helicopter from the state police to scan the thick pine forest south of Natchitoches. But by August, the trail was already cold, Detective Raymond Cole, a veteran of the parish sheriff's office, was one of the lead investigators. He remembered the frustration vividly. The long nights staring at the map of back roads, the sense that the answer was right there, just beyond reach. "We didn't have the tools we have today," he said years later. "No DNA testing, no cell phone records, no surveillance cameras. We were chasing shadows." Still, Cole and his team built their list of suspects methodically. At the top was Bobby Hill, Linda's former boyfriend. He worked at a local auto garage and was known for a short temper, especially when drinking. Several of Linda's co-workers said she had recently told them she planned to end things for good. One of her friends remembered Linda saying, "Bobby doesn't take no very well." Detectives brought him in again for questioning. This time they asked about a cut on his hand that he said came from a broken carburetor. They took photographs and notes, but had nothing solid. There was no body, no weapon, no witness, only suspicion. Next came Larry Johnston, a traveling salesman who had been in town the night Linda disappeared. He was staying at a motel off Highway 6, a mile from where her car was found. He'd checked out early the next morning and headed north. Police tracked him down in Baton Rouge, where he claimed he'd seen nothing unusual that night. His alibi, a motel clerk and a time-stamped receipt, held up. For a while the case went quiet. Then, in October 1985, a young fisherman reported finding what looked like fabric caught on a branch near the riverbank south of town. When detectives arrived, they recovered a small scrap of floral cloth, possibly from a dress, and a tarnished earring. Linda's mother identified the earring as part of a pair her daughter had worn the night she disappeared. That single piece of evidence reignited the investigation. Searchers combed that area for 3 more weeks, but nothing else surfaced. By early 1986, the state crime lab returned its analysis. No blood, no fingerprints, no usable trace. The earring and cloth were logged, stored, and quietly forgotten. Meanwhile, Bobby Hill left Natchitoches for a job in Texas. Officially, he was never charged. Unofficially, many locals never stopped whispering his name. Through the late 80s and early 90s, a few new leads flickered and died. A woman in Shreveport claimed to have seen someone matching Linda's description at a rest stop in 1987. Another caller from Baton Rouge said she'd overheard 2 men talking about a teacher who got herself in trouble. None of it led anywhere. By 1995, Detective Cole retired, still haunted by the case. The box containing all the evidence, Linda's earring, photos, tape-recorded interviews, was stored in a back room of the sheriff's office, labeled simply, Parker Linda 07-12-85. Years rolled on. The old courthouse changed hands. The department moved buildings, and the box followed quietly, gathering dust. Then, in 2022, a new sheriff, Angela Boudreau, ordered an audit of all cold cases in the parish. Among the faded files and forgotten evidence sat that same box. When a young investigator named Trent Morales opened it, he noticed something odd. A small envelope marked Forensic Hold 1986. Inside was a cotton swab sealed in evidence paper, labeled Trace from Vehicle. Back in 1986, there'd been no way to test it, but now, nearly 40 years later, that tiny sample was about to tell a story that had waited in silence for decades. Detective Morales contacted the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab, who confirmed they could extract DNA from even degraded material. The swab, carefully preserved, was sent for testing. It would take several months to process, but when the results finally came back, they revealed something investigators had never expected. The DNA belonged to a male suspect, and the profile didn't match anyone in their system. But using forensic genealogy, analysts compared the DNA to open-source databases, building out family trees, tracing ancestral lines through distant relatives. After weeks of analysis, one family line kept appearing. It led straight back to Robert Bobby Hill. But there was a twist. Bobby Hill had died in 2001, killed in a highway accident outside Beaumont, Texas. The man who took Linda Parker's life had been gone for over 2 decades, or so everyone thought, because when detectives looked deeper into the DNA connections, they uncovered something that made the entire case take an unexpected turn, proof that the truth was far more complicated and far more human than anyone had ever imagined. When the report came in from the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab, it felt like a jolt through time. A file long forgotten suddenly alive again. The DNA from the swab found in Linda Parker's car was finally speaking, and it had a name to whisper. The genetic genealogy chart mapped dozens of distant relatives spread across the South, cousins, second cousins, great-uncles. The analyst at the lab, Dr. Marissa Elkins, explained that the strongest match came from a man in Texas who had voluntarily uploaded his DNA to a public ancestry site. Through cross-referencing, the pattern pointed unmistakably toward the Hill family. Detective Trent Morales leaned over the desk, staring at the screen. "So it's Bobby Hill?" he asked, almost relieved. The suspect everyone had believed guilty from the start. Dr. Elkins nodded slowly. "That's where it leads. But there's something strange. A few of the markers don't fit perfectly. It's not a direct match to Bobby, it's 1 generation off." Morales frowned. "You mean—" She finished his thought. "It's his son. But according to the original files, Bobby Hill didn't have a son. Not officially. The revelation forced the new cold case unit to re-examine everything. They began tracing Hill's life after 1985. His move to Texas, his jobs, his relationships. In 1986, barely a year after Linda's disappearance, he'd married a woman named Carla Henderson in Jefferson County. Records showed the couple had 1 child, Aaron Hill. Born in 1987, that made Aaron roughly 36 years old now, and alive. Detectives reached out to Texas authorities, who helped locate Aaron Hill in Beaumont, working as a mechanic at an auto parts warehouse, just like his father once had. When Louisiana investigators arrived at his workplace in early 2023, Aaron looked stunned. "I don't understand," he said quietly when they asked about his father. "I barely knew the man. He died when I was 14. They asked if he would consent to a DNA sample to help confirm something in an old Louisiana case. He agreed without hesitation. Weeks later, the results came back. A 99.98% parental link between the DNA in Linda Parker's car and Aaron Hill's biological father, Robert Bobby Hill. The confirmation was definitive. After 38 years, detectives finally had their suspect, even if he could no longer be arrested or tried. But for Morales and Sheriff Boudreaux, something didn't add up. The DNA from the car proved Bobby's presence, yes, but it didn't prove murder. They needed something more. Something that tied him directly to Linda's disappearance and death. That something came from a source no one expected. In March 2023, Sheriff Boudreaux received a call from a woman living in Lake Charles. She said she had seen a news clip about the reopened case and recognized the name Bobby Hill. She told investigators she had known him briefly in the mid-1980s, when she worked at a small diner near the Texas border. "I remember him coming in one night real late," she said. "He was shaking, looked like he'd been crying. He told me he'd done something stupid and couldn't go back to Louisiana." The woman never thought much of it afterward, until she saw the name on TV. Her statement wasn't enough to close a case, but it was a start. Then came the discovery that would finally end the mystery. During the cold case review, an intern helping organize old evidence noticed something strange in the property log. A sealed container, item Darkadze 14B, listed simply as metal object recovered from vehicle floorboard. It had never been tested. Inside was a rusted belt buckle with faint traces of blood. It had been collected in 1985, but stored improperly, thought to be from Linda's car and unrelated. Modern DNA analysis revealed the blood belonged to Linda Parker, and on the underside of the buckle, preserved by rust, was a partial fingerprint. When the print was digitally enhanced and compared to the state's historical records, it matched perfectly with Robert Hill's 1982 employment file from the auto shop. That was it. The last missing link. In June 2023, Sheriff Boudreau held a press conference at the Natchitoches Parish Courthouse. Standing before cameras, she announced, after 38 years, the Louisiana State Police and our department can confirm that Robert Bobby Hill was responsible for the abduction and murder of Linda Parker in July 1985. Although he is deceased, we now have the evidence that provides certainty and gives this family the justice they've been waiting for. Linda's younger sister, Carolyn Parker, stood quietly in the front row, holding a framed photo of her sister. She'd spent nearly her entire life waiting to hear those words. When reporters asked what closure meant to her, she said through tears, "It doesn't bring Linda back. But now when I go to bed, I don't have to wonder anymore." That's something I never thought I'd get. For the people of Natchitoches, it was the end of a ghost story that had haunted their town for nearly 4 decades. But for Detective Morales, it marked something else. A reminder that buried evidence, old files, and forgotten names still held secrets waiting to be heard. Before closing the file, he looked again at Linda's photograph, the smiling teacher who'd once believed the world was full of promise, and whispered to himself, "We finally heard you." Yet as he prepared to shelve the folder, a new thought crossed his mind. One detail in the genealogy report that still didn't make sense. A name connected not to Bobby Hill, but to someone else entirely. And it hinted that the full truth about 1985 might be even darker than what anyone had just accepted. The press had moved on within days of the sheriff's announcement. For most of Louisiana, the Linda Parker case was now over. Justice, though decades late, had finally been served, and the name of her killer confirmed. But for Detective Trent Morales, something about that genealogical chart from the crime lab still kept him awake at night. On the last page of the ancestry report, beneath the branches tracing back to Bobby Hill's relatives, there was another faint connection, not a strong match but enough to raise questions. It led to a woman named Teresa Lang, a 74-year-old living in Shreveport. According to the data, her DNA had been a distant match to both Bobby Hill's family and an unknown male sequence. Found on the edges of the blood sample, from the belt buckle, Morales couldn't let it go. He contacted the lab again and asked Dr. Elkins to run a deeper cross-reference. The result came back showing a familial overlap between Bobby Hill and Teresa Lang's late husband. Harold Lang, who had died in 1998, a man who had once worked as a truck driver, traveling routes between Shreveport, Alexandria, and Natchitoches. That placed him right along the same stretch of highway where Linda's car was found. Morales began to dig into old records, curious whether Bobby Hill and Harold Lang had ever crossed paths. What he discovered made his stomach drop. Both men had worked at the same auto repair yard in 1983 for nearly 6 months. Now, the question shifted. Had Hill really acted alone? As Morales traced through local archives and old arrest records, he uncovered a forgotten incident. A 1984 police report in Shreveport documenting a bar fight between 2 men, Bobby Hill and Harold Lang. But the report mentioned dispute over a woman, but no further details. Both men were released the next morning. Morales pulled out Linda Parker's photo again. Young, kind, always helping people with their cars. It wasn't hard to imagine she might have been the center of unwanted attention. He theorized that Linda could have known both men, perhaps through her students' families, or through her car troubles. Witnesses from 1985 had said she'd been seen talking to a man near the gas station that morning, but no one could ever identify who. What if it hadn't been Bobby Hill that day, but someone else with him? He went back through the evidence logs, searching for anything that could tie another person to the scene. That's when he noticed something small, easily missed. A cigarette butt recovered from the passenger side floor mat of Linda's car. It had been catalogued but never tested. When sent for modern DNA analysis, the results came back 2 weeks later. The sample was not from Bobby Hill. It was a partial match to Harold Lang. Morales froze as he read the report. For years, everyone had assumed Linda left with Bobby Hill alone, maybe voluntarily, maybe coerced. But this new evidence suggested that Harold Lang had been there too. He drove out to Shreveport to speak with Teresa Lang, who welcomed him into her small home with cautious eyes. "I know why you're here," she said before he even sat down. "I saw the story on TV. I was hoping nobody would come knocking." Morales asked her gently if she remembered July 1985. She nodded. "Harold came home late that night," she said. "He was jumpy. He told me he'd seen something awful on the road near Natchitoches. Said he stopped to help a young woman and her car, but the man she was with told him to leave. He said the man looked like someone from the yard they used to work at." Her voice trembled. "I didn't think anything of it then. But a week later he told me, if anyone asks, I was home that night." I thought he was joking. But he never spoke of it again. That conversation turned the case on its head. If both Hill and Lang were at the scene, then Linda's final hours might have unfolded far differently than anyone had believed. Dr. Elkins confirmed that the mixed DNA from the belt, buckle, long thought to be contamination, actually contained 2 male profiles, one dominant, Bobby Hill's, and one faint but consistent with Harold Lang's. The sheriff's department released a supplemental statement in October 2023, revealing that the evidence now pointed toward 2 suspects involved in Linda Parker's abduction and murder. Hill may have initiated it, but Lang had likely been complicit, either during or after the act. In the quiet towns of Louisiana's Red River Parish, the revelation sent a new wave of disbelief. People who'd once thought they'd heard the final chapter realized they hadn't. For Carolyn Parker, it was a second heartbreak. "We thought it was over," she told a local reporter. "We thought we knew who did it. But now I have to live knowing 2 men knew what happened to my sister, and both went to their graves keeping that secret." Morales filed his final report in December 2023. The last line read, "While both suspects are deceased, the truth has been established through modern science. This case serves as a reminder that evidence never forgets, and justice, though delayed, will always seek the light." By the time he sealed the folder for the last time, the rain outside had turned to a mist. He looked toward the courthouse steps, where the Parker family had gathered earlier that day to thank the department. There was no celebration, just quiet, somber peace. The cold case that haunted Louisiana for nearly 4 decades was finally closed. But for those who lived through it, the echoes of 1985 would never truly fade. By early 2024, the small Louisiana town that had spent nearly 40 years living under the shadow of Linda Parker's disappearance finally found itself standing at the edge of closure. There would be no courtroom, no jury, no sentencing. Both men responsible were long dead. But for those who had waited decades, there was something far more powerful than punishment: the truth. The sheriff's office organized a memorial in February at the First Baptist Church of Natchitoches, the same church where Linda had taught Sunday school in the early 80s. The weather that morning felt eerily familiar. Gray skies, cool air, a mist rolling off the Cane River. Inside, the pews were full. Teachers who had once worked with Linda, her surviving students, her sister Carolyn, and even a few relatives of Bobby Hill sat side by side in silence. When Sheriff Boudreaux stepped to the podium, she didn't speak like a law officer. Her tone was soft, almost maternal. "We can't bring her back," she said, voice catching. "But today we can return her story to the people who loved her. For 40 years her name meant heartbreak. From now on it will mean strength." Behind her, a photo of Linda appeared on a small projector screen, smiling in the school hallway. chalk on her hands, sunlight catching her hair. For a long time no one spoke. Then Carolyn Parker rose from her seat and placed a single white rose at the base of her sister's framed picture. "She was the best of us," she whispered. The townspeople didn't forget the case, they carried it with them. Local newspapers published retrospectives about how one woman's disappearance changed police work in rural Louisiana. Younger officers in the sheriff's department said the story inspired them to treat every missing person file as if it might one day need to stand the test of decades. Across the state, cold case units were re-evaluating their oldest files. The Louisiana State Police opened over 40 dormant investigations for re-examination, hoping the same DNA genealogy techniques that identified Bobby Hill and Harold Lang could breathe new life into other unsolved mysteries. For Detective Trent Morales, though the end of the Parker case came with a strange stillness, after years of chasing ghosts, the silence felt unnatural. He left his office one evening, walked to the courthouse square, and sat on a bench overlooking the dark river that had been searched so many times back in 1985. He thought about Linda, about the world she never got to see, the students who grew up without her guidance, the family that waited nearly a lifetime for answers. He also thought about Hill and Lang, men who went to their graves hiding their crimes, men whose secrets were only undone by time and science. The irony wasn't lost on him. In 1985, DNA evidence was still in its infancy, an untested dream whispered among forensic pioneers. 40 years later, it had become the voice of the dead, speaking when humans no longer could. A few months later, Morales visited Carolyn Parker one last time. She was tending the small garden behind her house, the same one her sister had planted when they were young. He handed her a folder, the final signed closure document from the case. Carolyn traced her fingers over the words "Case Solved" stamped at the top. "It doesn't make the hurt go away," she said softly. "But now at least it stops the wondering." Morales nodded. "That's all we can ever hope for," he replied. "That someday, the wondering ends." After she went back inside, he lingered for a moment, listening to the quiet buzz of summer insects. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle, the same scent described in the old police reports from that July morning, so many years ago. The Parker home still stood, repainted, restored, but heavy with memories. The swing on the front porch creaked in the wind. It was as if time itself had chosen to exhale. In the years that followed, true crime documentaries and podcasts would revisit Linda's case, framing it as a story not of tragedy but of persistence, how one family's refusal to let go and one detective's unwillingness to stop digging had finally uncovered the truth hidden beneath decades of silence. The people of Natchitoches never forgot her name. Each year on July 19th, the town placed candles along the riverbank, their reflections dancing on the water like fleeting spirits. And among them, one candle always burned brighter, the one lit by Carolyn Parker, for her sister who had finally been found, and finally been heard. Because after all the noise, all the years, all the unanswered questions, the truth had at last come to light, and that light, faint as it was, would never fade again.